Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I am really excited to be coming to you today in this podcast to talk a little bit about process consultation and the idea of the helping relationship and its kind of transcendence in all areas of our life. I think Shine was talking a little bit about this, that what were the skills that we're learning here not only apply in terms of how we work with our clients, but also how it affects how we work with our kids and our spouses and our neighbors and our communities. And so it's exciting to be talking about a topic that really has wide applicability. Well, you might notice the odd space behind me. It looks a little bland. I'm actually coming to you from a hotel room in Panama City, Panama. I'm here in the country teaching our research class for our Panamanian cohort, and I'm excited to be able to do this kind of via YouTube for a little bit, so that we can make sure that we hit all of our content. Now, before I get too far into stuff, I hope you are digging this text. This is a deep text, and Shine talks about a lot of amazing things. The 10 principles that he outlines in the first 3 chapters that we read are amazing assumptions that I think can be really, really helpful for us. Think about what it might mean to approach every interaction as trying to be helpful. And when you can't be helpful, that you back out of it, right? So what would happen to me if every interaction I had with somebody, my central goal was to try to be helpful, right? And if I couldn't do that, I removed myself from the situation. It would be an amazing shift in my own life, right? Think about what Shine says, that everything is an intervention. We go back to that idea of the river. We cannot forget the idea that we cannot step in the same river twice. So Shine really provides an amazing set of assumptions for us to really build out our idea of consultation. And we're going to talk about different models of consultation in this particular podcast, but I don't want to miss the idea of process consultation. It is a methodology, right? It's a technique, it's a skill that we're going to be learning in this class, and I'm excited to be starting that journey with you today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with some slides and kind of talk through some things. And I'm going to ask you to contemplate some questions. I know we can't really interact together here, but I want us to be able to think through some things together over the course of the next week. So again, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on some new content. So one of the most important things I think we can really begin to think about is this idea of organizational change and really why it happens, what is it, and why is it sometimes so messy. And we talked a little bit about this last week in our class, but clearly organizations, we go through seasons, right? And so sometimes you can walk into an organization and they're in a period of growth, they're in a period of expanding and opportunity and innovation. Other times folks are stabilizing, right? Let's just kind of get to the core of what we are. Let's kind of figure out what that is and what that means for us. And other times organizations can be experiencing some pullback, right? Perhaps they're downsizing, or people call that right sizing. There's no doubt that organizational change is happening. Our text, Shine and Block, and all the readings that we've talked about up to this point really suggest that change is inevitable. It's the only one true reality that we can lean on. So we know that change is going to happen, but let's not miss the idea that sometimes change is messy. Doesn't feel good. It's uncomfortable. It's very time consuming. It takes up not only a lot of our physical time, but our emotional time. We think about it. We talk about it. We talk about it with our loved ones and our spouses and our partners and our neighbors and our friends and our kids. We talk about change a lot. I mean, think about a change in your own life, right? A change in lifestyle, a change in perspective, a change in living situation, some kind of change. Sometimes these things can be incredibly messy, very time consuming, and ridiculously difficult to navigate. Sometimes it's because there's a power imbalance. Sometimes it's because we don't understand what's coming. Sometimes it's just the unknown of the situation. It's like stepping out into an unknown reality and not knowing where you're even going to land your first footstep. Who likes to do that? How difficult would that be, right? And so the idea here is that we have to understand the nature of change. We have to be comfortable with the nature of change, why it happens and what it is. And I want us to think a little bit about that. Now, Shine goes on and he really talks about the idea of process consulting. And he comes at it from this particular perspective that one can only help the human system help itself. We cannot make someone do something. We cannot force someone. Block talks about the interesting thing about consultation relationships within an organization is that they're lateral relationships, and that in and of itself is a principle of ambiguity. There's no linear relationship there. We don't have to do what somebody says, but reciprocally, they don't have to do what we say. So this lateral relationship, this sense of one-upness and one-downness and power imbalance. So how do we help someone help themselves? How do we not take it on? How do we not take on line management responsibilities, as Block might suggest? But we really do help someone from a consultation process. So one of the most interesting things I think Shine says, and there's no doubt that the first 3 chapters of this book are just packed with information. Shine states this. He says, the person seeking help often does not know what he or she is looking for and should not be expected to know. What an interesting way to phrase the context of a problem in an organization. The person, let me just don't miss this. Let me reiterate this. The person seeking help often does not know what he or she is looking for and should not be expected to know. I'm reminded of a story from my little girl when she was about a year and a half, and she had an itch on her back. And she was scratching her belly, as if she scratched her belly, it would scratch her back. She didn't know yet that she could reach her hands around her back and actually scratch the itch she had on her back. And so she was trying to scratch her belly as a mechanism to scratch her back. She did not know how to solve her problem, and we would never have expected her to know that either. Developmentally, she would have known that she could have reached her hand around there. And organizations sometimes can approach this from the exact same perspective. Sometimes they do not know where that itch is. Sometimes they do not know how to get at it. And they should not be expected to know. We cannot assume that someone knows what the problem is. Shine talks extensively about this. He specifically uses a bunch of examples about his wife and his students and clients and a stranger that he meets on the side of the street, right? And he says, well, how do I even know what the assumption is? And this is where Shine is really talking about understanding reality and what he calls checking our ignorance, right? Being aware of our own ignorance. I think that's actually principle number 2. Principle number 3, where he says, the only way I can discover my own inner reality is to learn to distinguish what I know from what I assume I know, from what I truly do not know, that we consistently and constantly check our own ignorance. And we ask questions. And sometimes organizations, that's our job, is to move that idea forward. Well, there are really 3 models that overlap between the Block and the Shine text from which we can draw. But I want us to remember, particularly Shine's principle number 4, that everything we do is an intervention. That just as every interaction reveals some kind of diagnostic information, so does every interaction have consequences for both the client and for you and I as the consultants. We can never step in the same river twice, and so from that perspective, we must be prepared. We must be prepared. So I'm going to quickly overview 3 models of consultation that I think you need to be aware of. The first is, here are the 3 models. It's expertise, the expertise or the pair of hands model, the doctor-patient model, and then the process consultation model. So let's dive into these. So Shine talks about and Block talks about the idea of the expertise model. Here, the client purchases from the consultant information or expert service that the client is unable to provide. So think about like what that might mean. So somebody has you come in, you bring some expertise, and they are purchasing that service, something that they cannot do for themselves, and you are going to give or serve the client in that particular manner. It assumes some things. It assumes that the client knows the service information that they are looking for, and it assumes that the consultant is able to provide the service. These are pretty dangerous assumptions, I'll be honest with you. Oftentimes the client does not know what they are looking for, and sometimes we are not able to provide the service. I just don't have expertise in that particular area, right? The interesting thing about the process consultation model is technical skill doesn't really trump technique here. But in the expertise model, if you do not have expertise in the service, you cannot provide the function for the client. Goes on to say that this client gives the power to the consultant. This is so dangerous. It is so, so seducing and so appealing when someone comes to us and says, "Hey, can you fix this for me?" And I say, "Of course, it's simple. Just do these kinds of things, right? It's no big deal." The seduction and that power is, oh, so alluring. But don't be tempted by it. Don't be tempted by that power because it creates a significant power imbalance, right? Sometimes we do not need to have that kind of power. But in the expertise model, the client gives power to the consultant, right? The effectiveness of this particular strategy depends on 5 different things: that the client can correctly diagnose the need, the client can correctly communicate the need, the client can assess capabilities of the consultant, the organization can be studied and reduced to useful knowledge, and the client has thought through possible repercussions of bringing in a consultant. I'm telling you now that sometimes these things are not reality. It's rare. It's a rare circumstance where the client can correctly diagnose the need. Now, I'm not saying that they don't know their need. I'm not suggesting that at all. Here's what I'm suggesting is that it's more complex sometimes. There's deeper issues. There's systemic issues that we need to uncover, and we need to think about gathering some valid information, some valid data, some stories, some interviews, some kind of information from someone. The next model is the doctor-patient model, where the client hires the consultant to find out what's going on and prescribe a remedy for what ails it. Think about when you go to the doctor because I'm sick. The doctor gives me, does a little checkup, gives me some meds. I go home, I take them. Here, the consultant administers the program. The client is maybe even more dependent on the consultant because they have no power in this relationship at all. And diagnosis is often an intervention with unknown consequences, right? We got to think about when this might work. Uh, there are some pretty dangerous assumptions here, particularly the consultant administering the programs. When someone takes a hands-off approach like that, they might as well be saying, "Well, here, look, you just do it," right? Block says that it should be a 50-50 relationship between the client and the consultant. That even if you can do some of that work, you can send the communication, you can schedule the rooms, you can administer some of the program, that maybe you shouldn't do that because everybody needs an equal stake in the game. And as soon as you enter into something other than a 50-50 relationship, you are assuming more power in the relationship than perhaps is recommended. Go on to talk about when this is effective. In the doctor-patient model, it's when the client can accurately determine the person, team, or unit that is sick. Sick and those around them are willing to provide accurate information, and the sick must accept diagnosis and comply with prescription. The client's ability to actually make recommendation or the recommended changes is completely dependent on effectiveness here. And then consequences of the diagnostic process are understood and accepted by all involved, right? And what does this actually mean? That people do what we recommend. I can tell you I've made recommendations hundreds of times, and they've fallen on deaf ears. I've made mistakes in this particular model myself. It's much more challenging. We have to have some particular skill here, right? But the doctor-patient model is just one of 3 of the models that we might even be able to use. And so Shine goes on, and Block goes on to talk about the process consultation model. Now, Block doesn't explicitly talk about this, but clearly Shine does. The process consultation model really focuses on joint diagnosis when passing on diagnostic and problem-solving skills, that everyone is involved. We're not giving someone a fish, but we're teaching them how to fish. We're teaching them how to solve their own problems. Consultants should not share insights prematurely. That we should listen. We'll talk about that in the next podcast with active inquiry. The reason we should do that is they could be wrong. They could ultimately damage credibility. The client could be defensive very early in the relationship and could put up walls to keep you out. Sometimes clients will check you out. They'll interrogate you about these kinds of things to see, are you going to listen to me or are you going to make recommendations for me? The effectiveness of this particular model depends on the client normally not knowing what is wrong but is motivated, that they display a constructive intent to improve, to get better, that the client knows what will work and a willingness to communicate what will work, that the consultant has the skills to diagnose and intervene, and that the client, seeing problems and developing remedies, are less likely to implement solutions and fix problems that come back, right? So they're able to do some of these things on their own. So some key assumptions that you might be able to lean on are particularly with the process consultation model, is that the client must learn to see the problem for themselves by sharing in the diagnostic process. We must share this process, not own this process. You cannot take, theoretically, and conceptually speaking, Shine talks about this, taking the monkey off your client's back. You must be relieved of that particular pressure. You do not need to take the monkey off of your client's back. That diagnosis is an intervention that will have consequences. There is no doubt stepping in that river, ladies and gentlemen, will move the water around you. You will have some consequences. Whether that consequence is minor or major is yet to be determined, but the intervention will have consequence. And that the intervention should be owned by the client. We cannot own the intervention. It would be premature and I think a little grandiose to suggest that we can make any influence in an organization where we do not currently work. It is only the people that work in that organization that understand the dynamics of that organization in a way that they know what will work, what will not work, and when it will work. That intervention must be owned by the client. And then lastly, the consultant can provide suggestions, guides, and influence, but ultimately the client must make the decision. We can make recommendations, but the client must own the decision. Finally, and just kind of wrapping this up, and I know this is a ton of information to throw at you in a 15-minute podcast, but I'm just supplementing here. Here's some things I would want you to know. That the helping process should begin with a PC model. We should never start with a doctor-patient model or a pair of hands. And I'm not suggesting that we should never use those models. Sometimes those models work really well. But if you're into a helping process mode, it should begin with process consultation. If the problem, definition, and solution are clear, use expert model. This rarely occurs, though. If you can define the problem and the solution, and these things are pretty clear, then fine, use the expert model. But again, this rarely occurs. If the problem definition is clear, but the solution is not, then the doctor-patient model works well. If I know I'm sick, I go into the doctor gives me some kind of an intervention, no problem. If that works out, perfect. Oftentimes this is thought to be the case, but rarely is it the case. And here's why. Because oftentimes the problem is ill-defined. It's ambiguous. And then when the definition or solution are unclear, which is most often the case, then we would encourage you to think about using the process consultation model. Now, for more details about that process consultation model, read Shine. Dig into those first 3 chapters. So I know we've covered a ton of information in a really short period of time, but I want to encourage you to go back here and take a look at some of the information that is really locked up in these pages here. The 10 principles that Shine outlines are incredible principles for us to live by, not only as consultants, but really as people who interact with other people all the time. Think about, again, what it would be like if you really assessed your helping relationship with others and how you interacted with other people. Well, until next time.